2023 sucked for movies, but even the worst years in cinema still have a lot of great films that you can watch over and over again. And not gonna lie, I always love doing top 10 lists, mainly because, for starters, I need to remind myself of the optimistic moments in my life. And the other is that at the end of the day, we're still a handful of great movies that I saw this year. And it's important to emphasize which ones succeeded and why, so that hopefully cinema can get a hell of a lot better in the future. And my god, I really hope it does. Normally I do a top 15 or 20 list because there are so many movies that I feel get underappreciated or I like more than others, but again, this is 2023. We didn't really get that many gems, but there were movies like Maestro, Guardians of the Galaxy 3, The Killer, Moon Garden, Asteroid City that I thought for sure were going to end up on this list at different points, but are totally worth checking out regardless. So, with that said, let's get to the countdown. Okay, so this is a hot take, but I prefer Brandon Cronenberg over David Cronenberg, especially after watching Possessor and Infinity Pool. With this one especially, he takes a plot element that we've seen in a million other sci-fi movies, but he puts a fresh spin to it where it can be symbolic of class, greed, remorse, atonement, and even addiction, sometimes all at once, and yet without the metaphors, it still serves for an incredibly fucked up horror movie. The cinematography is full of claustrophobic, psychedelic, and sometimes sexy visuals, even all together. Alexander Skarsgård plays multiple different traumatized versions of himself so well, and once again, Mia Goth is just fucking terrifying. M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong, in my opinion anyways, makes his true comeback with a movie that's the closest he's ever gotten to replicating the 90s hits that made him a star. And that's not to say the script isn't still awkward here and there or doesn't fuck up a couple performances, because that'll never change about him. But story-wise, I legit had no idea where it was going, what the outcome was going to be, or who to trust until the very end of the film, which, not gonna lie, actually did make me tear up a little bit. The direction is as stylish as ever, gives this sense of dread that a one-location setting like this needs. The flashbacks actually felt natural and added to the dilemmas of the characters, who, whether they're heroes or villains, are all still likable yet flawed for completely different reasons. Dave Bautista gives a career-best performance, but my personal favorite in the movie was Ben Aldridge, who was equally as impressive. This obviously isn't for everybody. In fact, you could list off every problem you have with this film, and I probably couldn't disagree with you. But personally, I just love how original the presentation of this was. I actually showed the trailer of this to some coworkers of mine, and it didn't matter how bright the room was. Just watching it, they just sat there and went, nope, can't do it, I'm out. Hell, for like a month and a half after I saw this movie, I was scared shitless to be in the dark in my own house. Like, I have no problem being in the dark outside, because if something happens, you can run to a house or a building and get help. But in your house, when you're alone in the dark and shit goes wrong, you're fucked. There's nobody there to help you. And there are so many moments like the knife, looking under the bed, and that fucking chatterbox phone that still stick with me to this day, and I love it. Speaking of movies that are not for everybody, this ending, I don't think is for anyone, unless you're in the deepest, darkest corners of Pornhub, but the movie acknowledges that you're not supposed to take it seriously, I think. At least I hope not. Either way, like, this was the hardest I've laughed at any movie this year. All of the cast members, especially Nathan Lane and Megan Mullally, just embrace the random, depraved stupidity of this script that is clearly a send-up to John Waters and Richard O'Brien cult classics. The songs are surprisingly catchy and well-written. The choreography is fun to watch. The sets and costumes are all bright and colorful. This just has the feeling of a Broadway musical brought to life, and we don't get enough of those anymore. We also don't get enough of comedies that will do just about anything, and boy do I mean anything, to get a laugh. You know, all those movies that can't get made today? A24 made a giant fuck you to that, and I love it. Dead Reckoning did what the last 4 Mission Impossibles have succeeded at, being nothing more than a good time at the movies. The action sequences are exhilarating, all filmed in practical locations with the actors doing their own stunts. Each set piece manages to outdo the other. Just the plot points in between of characters trying to sneak in, gather information, and get out alive are as suspenseful as the fighting. Ethan and his team are as charismatic as ever, and the newcomers all leave a memorable mark, especially Haley Atwell and a fucking batshit crazy Pom Klementieff. I really want to see her play more villains in the future. I'll admit, I had to watch this twice to understand why it was even called The Boy and the Heron, but needless to say, it was totally worth it. This has become one of my all-time new favorite Ghibli movies. The animation is as exquisite as ever, but the visuals take a darker, more mature tone where they get psychedelic, intense, and downright violent at moments. Sometimes this feels more like a psychological horror than a fantasy drama, but in my opinion anyways, it's not dark just to be dark. Miyazaki has some smart things to say about accepting the process of life and death, that one can't exist without the other. And for all the voices that didn't work in the English dub, the ones that did made for some of the most lovable, endearing characters Miyazaki has ever written, especially Robert Pattinson, who is completely unrecognizable as the Heron. I'm still shocked that it was him. To all the people who say that John Wick 4 just goes on and on forever, I say, yeah, pretty cool, I know. Everything you love about the John Wick style of fighting is dialed up to 11 on this one, and the things that we haven't seen before, like a long take shootout, a soundtrack that's actually memorable, an insane amount of flight of stairs, this actually might be my new favorite in the franchise. Keanu can still do this role in his sleep, my dad's convinced that he is at this point. All of the newcomers like Bill Skarsgård, Donnie Yen, Hiroyuki Sanada, Rina Sawayama, Shamir Anderson all kick an insane amount of ass. And I really wish that Lance Reddick would have been around to see the final product. Minus One is 2023's version of RRR or Parasite, a movie that proves that casual audiences can get invested in foreign films. You don't need to be a Godzilla fan in order to love this one, and it does a much better job at sending up classic Hollywood blockbusters than, well, modern day Hollywood blockbusters. The director of this clearly understands what works about old-fashioned Spielberg movies like Close Encounters or Jaws, where the best creature features are about humans caught in the crossfire and the monsters represent their greatest fears. All the actors give great performances, their characters are so likable, reasonably flawed, and have personal motives for wanting to take down Godzilla. And every time Godzilla is on screen, it is fucking intense. The music is suspenseful, the buildup is just perfect. Every introduction to him just had me shaking, along with the sound design. Every time they unleashed his roar and that fucking atomic breath, it was, needless to say, it was one of the best theatrical experiences I've had in years. Beau Is Afraid is unlike any movie I've seen this year. When I left the theater, which I just want to point out, my buddy Josh and I were the only ones in there for 3 hours in an IMAX theater of all things. When we walked out once it was over, I was just laughing uncontrollably at whatever the fuck I had just seen. I really needed to process it, but I knew for a fact that everything clicked with me. This succeeded at being a dark comedy, a tragedy, a psychological drama, a fantasy, psychological and supernatural horror, live action, animated, and in my opinion, it went through every tone and genre seamlessly. Joaquin Phoenix was perfect at conveying multiple different forms of anxiety and paranoia, going back and forth from being completely relatable to this weak, complete and utter pushover with a ton of regrets over the things that he should have taken charge of in his life. The supporting cast ranging from Amy Ryan, Patti LuPone, Parker Posey, Stephen McKinley Henderson, Denise Menochet, even Richard Kind are all fucking batshit crazy, give Beau plenty of reasons to be afraid, but they're also not one-dimensional villains or pretentious metaphors. If you were to rewatch this movie, you would get some subtext that would actually give each of these characters different backstories or understandable motives to get in Beau's way. And that's really the great thing about Beau Is Afraid. There aren't enough movies out there, in my opinion, where five people can watch this movie and love or hate it. They would get different interpretations that can actually enhance your appreciation of how good it was. And I say how good it was for me personally and anyone else who felt that way, because This is the crowning achievement of you're gonna either love or hate it, nowhere in between. Josh utterly despised the film. The first time around, he lessened up a little bit after rewatching it. He still hated it, but that's the thing. It's not going to change everyone's perception on art house movies, let alone movies in general, but it was overload in the best possible way, in the best possible way that I could ever imagine. And despite being an incredibly cynical, tragic comedy, is the exact opposite of my number one movie, which I had no anticipation of being on this list whatsoever. I thought Dix the Musical was going to be the best musical I had seen, but boy, was I wrong. Wonka is the only movie this year that I would describe as fantastic. Right from the opening frame, I was just sucked in and was enjoying everything that I saw on screen. Timothée Chalamet was surprisingly the perfect choice and was charismatic as hell. I had no idea that Chalamet could have more than one facial expression, let alone could sing and dance, which he does so whimsically. It changed my perception of him as an actor, and I already liked him to begin with. The chemistry that he had with Kala Lane, sorry if I got that wrong, was absolutely infectious. I loved seeing her on screen working off of him. Keegan-Michael Key, Olivia Colman, Tom Davis, Patterson Joseph, Matthew Boynton. Not you, you had one stupid joke. Even Rowan Atkinson for 5 minutes are the perfect definition of cartoony mustache-twirling villains. Even bit parts like Jim Carter were so likable. Sally Hawkins was in it for 2 scenes and actually had me tearing up at the finale. Hugh Grant as the Oompa Loompa was kind of pointless for a couple of reasons. For one, even if you were to get a dwarf actor for an Oompa Loompa, they would have shrunk them down with CGI. It wouldn't have made a difference. And second, to say that he was in it for 15 minutes would be generous, in my opinion. But nevertheless, for a role that Grant was clearly half-assing, it actually does serve the character and the Oompa Loompa song very well. The music in this had me smiling ear to ear with every song and dance number imaginable. Toby Tallett's score was absolutely beautiful. I would still say Hisaishi's was better, but this is a close second. And Neil Hannon's original songs were utterly catchy as hell. I had so much room around me in the theater that I actually was kicking and tapping my feet to each of these song and dance numbers. The choreography was beautiful. The sets, the costumes were all bright, vibrant, colorful, not the muted gray shit that you see in Hollywood so often these days. And altogether, this movie just had a sense of energy, magic, awe, and wonder that you would expect with a movie like Willy Wonka, and it's a prime example of a movie that is for anyone of any age. And you don't get that anymore. Hell, I'm surprised that this is the same cinematographer who did movies for Park Chan-wook. He actually does quite a few blockbusters and actually makes them look incredible, or better than they have any right to be. I genuinely don't know what else to say about this movie other than Oompa Loompa Doopity Dee. Wonka was the movie of the year for me. Story, songs, characters filled me with glee. My hat goes off to Tim Affey.